try to explore novel ways of finding new potential therapies. And I guess we will talk about that today. Almost all the useful treatments for bipolar disorder take a long time, and probably the most effective takes the longest. So lamotrigine, because it's got a titration phase of many weeks, nobody fully understands biology of these disorders. So to come up with rational pharmacotherapies that target them is a challenge. There's a bit of conflation of all forms of unhappiness that a person can suffer who may or may not have bipolar disorder with bipolar depression. So the idea that there's a one pill that's going to fix all forms of human unhappiness in or out of bipolar disorder is an unrealistic expectation.
What if a common blood pressure medication could reduce the worst depressive phase of bipolarity? For now, we have kind of like a lack of easy treatment for bipolar depression. And even if there's it's like, it's always a big question. And millions of us struggle with those heavy crash and low. I was there. And we're diving into new research that can change that. So welcome to Bipolar Talk, the podcast where we turn our bipolarity into an opportunity. I'm also bipolar and founder of HopeStage. I'm from France. My name is Clément Bessard. And today, our guest is Professor Michael Berk. He's a psychiatrist, researcher, and lead investigator of the CADET trial, studying whenever a familial hypertension medication could ease depressive symptoms during bipolar lows. And I would just let you present yourself, Michael.
Hi, Clement. So, I'm Michael Berk. I'm the director of the Impact Research Institute at Deakin University. And our major research interest, at least my major research interest, is the development of novel therapies for neglected mental health conditions. Despite being one of the top 10 causes of disability globally, bipolar disorder is neglected compared to almost every other major cause of disability. It lags behind in research investment, and there's a huge unmet need. Within bipolar disorder, it's probably fair to say we have pretty good treatments for mania, but depression is the major unmet need. Many people with depression struggle with persistent symptoms for reasons that are complicated, and I guess we'll talk about some of those. But a major focus of what we try and do within Impact is develop novel therapies, and we've tried to explore novel ways of finding new potential therapies. And I guess we will talk about that today.
Yeah, exactly. So to share a little bit about my past. So I've been through a lot of depression, and for me, it was really the worst time. And since I'm bipolar type 2, I have hypomanic phase. So for you, if you're listening, so think about, and I think maybe you can explain it better than I do, Michael. So what are the different type of bipolarity?
Look, I'm sure that you can explain your experience in a way that's got much more relevance and salience than I can. According to the textbook, there are two kinds of bipolarity, big ones. There's bipolar 1, where you have major episodes of mania with or without depression. Most people have depression in bipolar 1, but the hallmark feature is threshold episodes of mania. Bipolar 2, and there's some debate about whether it's totally separate or exists on a continuum, but it's a variant of bipolar disorder where people never have florid, severe manic episodes. They have little blips into hypomania. According to the book, they're going to last more than 4 days, but they can't be substantially impairing. And many people during those periods actually can feel particularly good and productive. It's not necessarily depressing. It's not necessarily impairing or associated with distress, but it's noticeably different to what's normal for people. And certainly it's very noticeable to others around them that they don't need to sleep, they have more energy, they're hyperactive, they can't stop talking, they're full of plans. Feels good, mostly, not always. But people can make poor judgment decisions during those episodes. But the biggest problem with the highs is that the highs are the fire and the lows are the ash. and you often pay for the highs in terms of lows that fairly characteristically follow. Not always, but often do.
Yeah, and that was one of the important things for me to understand is not wanting high anymore. And when I accepted that, then my low were almost none or really little.
Yeah.
So that's one of the big things that helped me a lot. And so we're talking about how to treat lows, because when you are there, and I've been there, it feels like horrible. Like you're lost and you really don't know when it's going to stop. And so you usually we try some medicines, but it takes a while. It takes at least a few weeks to sometimes works. And so that's what you're working on, Michael. Maybe you can tell us a little bit why those treatment take so long actually, and what are you working on?
Well, you're completely correct that almost all the useful treatments for bipolar disorder take a long time. And probably the most effective takes the longest. So lamotrigine, because it's got a titration phase of many weeks, you got many weeks, probably months before you get substantial benefit. And the benefits are substantial, but they take a very long time to accrue. Lithium, anticonvulsants are slow. Even atypicals, which probably work faster than the others, still take weeks. You're looking at 6 to 8 weeks for full effect to occur. So that's slow. But that's not unique to bipolar disorder. Antidepressants are very slow in unipolar depression as well. So there are many challenges. The first is not everybody benefits from antidepressants, and the answer and why that's the case is a very complicated issue. Nobody fully understands the biology of these disorders. So to come up with rational pharmacotherapies that target them is a challenge. The other challenge is that, as I often tell my patients, not all depression in bipolar disorder is due to bipolar disorder, because you can still have marital disharmony, you can still have problems at work, you can still have existential issues. And so a lot of the depression in bipolar disorder is due to the disorder, but not all. And so there's a bit of conflation of all forms of unhappiness that a person can suffer who may or may not have bipolar disorder with bipolar depression. And then there's the expectation that a pill should fix a bad relationship and existential distress, which it never will do. So sometimes one has to understand what is the disorder and what isn't, and treat accordingly. And if you're dealing with a workplace issue, a life phase issue, an existential issue, a marital issue, you need very different approaches. So the idea that there's a one pill that's going to fix all forms of human unhappiness in or out of bipolar disorder is an unrealistic expectation. But even saying that, we still need newer and better medications. So we need medications that are A, more effective, B, better tolerated, C, work faster, and D, work for people for whom other medications are not that effective. Now that's a big order, and you're probably not going to get all of that in one pill.
Yeah, and it's really like for me was finding a balance. So finding the right treatment, but
Yeah.
also doing everything else, which for me is like I'm quite lucky. I have a psychiatrist, psychologist, and a peer helper, and also talk a lot with my family. Like talking is, I think, helped me the most. Whenever I start feeling like a phase, for example, let's talk about depression, like feeling a bit like, I don't want to get out of bed, or I have those action plans that give me a little bit like a sign. And
Mm.
then I really talk quickly with my peer helper, with my girlfriend. And then quickly also I try to get as fast as possible a meeting with my psychiatrist. And then it's like most of the time, at least for a few years, I was quite lucky. And then I was more like a little bit depressed, but not in depression. But to go back a little bit into what you're doing with CADET. So from what I understood, you're trying to find a treatment that can works pretty well. And so what is the advantage actually? Because from what I understood, you're reusing some things that already exist, so the cost is quite low.
Yeah.
And the effect could be really interesting. But why did you choose this specific treatment?
Okay, so let me start with how we got to choosing it, and then let me talk about what advantages the medication might have. So the problem we have in bipolar disorder is that there's no clear molecular target. Nobody can say it's an abnormality of this receptor or this protein or this gene, or nobody knows. So we've taken a fairly unusual approach in developing treatments. Actually, one that's worked in other similar disorders like diabetes. Well, I say similar in terms of its architecture. So it's a complex, environmentally mediated, partially genetic disorder, and diabetes is similar. So we used a technique that's worked in diabetes to deliver novel therapies. So what we do is we try and understand what known treatments do to neurobiology by looking at gene expression. So we look at the messenger RNA, what genes are switched on and what genes are suppressed by known medications. So we don't want to just look at what lithium does, what lamotrigine does, what valproate does. We want to look at the aggregate net effect of all medications on gene expression in order for us to find what we call a gene expression signature, as some kind of genetic signature of the disease. Then, if we identify that, we can then say, well, what other drugs that are available give the same signature? What give the same readout in terms of transcriptomics, which is a fancy word for the expression of the genes? So if we can find another drug, a new drug, that does the same to gene expression, what all the known effective drugs, we think this is a way to break the impasse and to firstly understand something more about the neurobiology of the disorder, which isn't known. But secondly, we can go straight on to identifying a candidate. So we did this, and we come up with a long list of candidate drugs. So the first thing, we look at these drugs and we say, this one's a cancer drug, it's really poisonous, we wouldn't look at it. That drug makes no sense. And for many of them, it's, hang on a minute, this drug already we know works in the disorder. So it picks up a lot of drugs like antipsychotics that work or that we know are effective. So that's reassuring that it's picking up drugs that we know are effective. And we found angiotensin drugs come out quite strongly. But what also helped us is that other groups looking at treatment-resistant depression using similar methodologies also picked angiotensin drugs. So now we've got angiotensin drugs. We also have other drugs that get identified. We then say, okay, which of these drugs is safe, very good side effect profile, cheap, available, easy to use? Ping, this looks good. The second is we can then go to validate the drugs. So we do this by two ways. The first thing we do is we can use preclinical models. So there's some experimental models of rodent models of depression and rodent models of mania. And in both of those, it shows antidepressant and anti-manic efficacy, which is kind of nice. The next thing we do is we can look at human data. And these drugs are very useful because, firstly, they're very widely used. And so we can look at big data sets like the whole population of Denmark, the whole population of Norway, and we've done this. And then we can say, if you take these drugs, what's your risk of developing depression or bipolar disorder? It's dramatically lowered. What's also nice is, for some drugs, the act of taking a drug is a marker of a disease, or so there's confounding. But with blood pressure medicines, you can compare it to what other blood pressure medicines do. So we're able to say, okay, if you take this drug, or this class of drugs, your risk is roughly halved. But if you take a beta blocker, your risk is 1.3 times higher. And if you take a calcium channel drug for your blood pressure, makes no difference. So even in comparison to other blood pressure drugs, you're really lowering your risk. Then we can also look at data from trials where they've looked at quality of life, which is very similar as a measure of depression. So there's the hypertension trials and there's heart failure trials. And in those studies, quality of life compared to placebo, because these studies use placebo, is significantly better if you take these drugs. So that's enough of an argument for us to say it's really worth doing a trial. And so we were lucky to get funding to do the CADET trial. So if we look at the first thing you know about it is its side effect profile is probably much better than any psychotropic drug on the market. It really is very, very safe and well tolerated. Apart from lowering your blood pressure, which it actually doesn't do that well. I mean, people worry that their blood pressure is going to fall through their boots and they'll fall over. But most blood pressure medications will lower your blood pressure by about 7 points, 7 millimeters of mercury, which isn't that much, which is bad if you've got hypertension. But if you don't want your patients to get dizzy and fall over, that's good. So they're really well tolerated, even in terms of blood pressure. They're cheap. They're off patent. You're looking at $5 a month or something like that. You can buy it. So that makes it a lot easier to use. And so that allows us to get going and do and commence these studies.
Yeah. So maybe once.
Sorry, I forgot one step. Clement. And that is, you then look at the other things that this drug does, apart from lowering blood pressure, and you ask, do any of the other things that the drug does, is it relevant to depression? Well, angiotensin is a part of the stress response system. Right? So anything that dampens down and blunts the stress response system and makes the organism more resilient to stress, well, you have to imagine that wouldn't be a bad thing. The other thing that it does is it has fairly robust effects on inflammation. Now, a lot of effective psychiatric medicines have effects of inflammation, but all the angiotensin drugs dampen down inflammation, which is also part of the stress response system. They also reduce oxidative stress, and they enhance the growth and survival of neurons. So a lot of the off-target effects of these drugs are precisely what you would want to see in an antidepressant. That's what you would want any good antidepressant to do. So the off-label effects of the drug do things that make you think, hang on a minute, this might be useful to us. So all the ducks are now lined up, and so we've been able to get the study started.
So one thing it took me a while to understand is bipolar is like a chemical problem, from what I understand. And at the beginning, when I was diagnosed, I was like, oh, maybe I try without treatment. And I wanted to share my story because
Please do.
I think
people need to hear this.
Yeah, exactly. Because we see it a lot.
Because everybody goes through the same journey, right?
Yeah.
They need to hear. They need to hear from somebody who's got the frequent flyer miles.
And so, yeah, it took me a while to understand that I'm not broken or anything. And
Correct.
that if I can find a drug that can fix the chemical problem, a big part of the job will be done. Not the full job, because I still need to not drink, not smoke, like go to bed early, this type of thing. And I still need to buy my system, like to build and buy it, because in a way you can also ask a psychiatrist, it's a way to buy it. But what I mean is, yeah, if you have depression, if you have bipolar, in most cases, a drug can fix the chemical problem. And what Michael is doing research to help us, like, basically get better. So as each one of us. And the good thing is, and what I really like about CADET is using a drug that is already old. So basically, when a drug is really old, it's becoming a generic, so everybody can manufacture it. And the labs who did the drug don't make money out of it anymore. So if the research success, meaning like every person who has bipolar in the world, in every even countries which is quite poor, they could have access to this drug. And since it's easy to take, and you from what I understand, you don't have to do a lot of like, yeah, you take it like by eating. How do you take the?
It's a tablet.
Yeah, it's what I thought. So I wanted to share that because I know research can be scary, but it's really like a chance to be part of something bigger, I would say. because of course you're helping yourself, so you're giving a chance to maybe leave depression faster, which is cool. But on the other side, you're giving a chance to maybe all of us to have a better chance to get out of depression in the future. So I wanted to say that because I feel like we're scared about drugs because we've seen bad things happening and we've seen secondary effects. But in most cases, from like the thousands of people I met, most of us, we take treatment every day because what works the best. So I wanted to do this little quote like this, but maybe you can explain this a little bit more about like, because what we want at the end of the day is like, how can we get out of depression? And so, of course, your research really helped on that, but I wanted you to explain a bit more, like how does it work? And maybe also if you have other tips, like practical tips, like if tomorrow, let's say someone is in depression, how do you help him get out of it?
Well, I'm kind of interested to know how you have, because I imagine that you have accumulated a lot of wisdom about how you get out of it. So in addition to the medication, what are the things that you have done that you have found useful?
For me, I think the most important is to have a friend who that I can call every day at the same time in the morning. So during my last depression, at every day, I walk in the park at 9 a.m. and I call my friend. And it was probably for me one of the most important things because I could get the light, I could go out, I can talk to someone, and yeah, it's like the simplest trick, but it worked for me.
Well, it's actually more, it's several tricks in one, because you highlight the importance of social network and social connection, which is a critical element. Being able to just talk to somebody, having people on your side, people who care and listen and you relate to, that's hugely important and meaningful, whether you do or don't have a problem. But it's probably doubly important if you are struggling with a difficulty. Exercise is critical, really helps. The problem with exercise is when you're really at your lowest, it's really hard to motivate yourself to go to the gym when you're at your lowest. It's easier when you're well, but so it's, as much as we talk about exercise as being critical to depression, and we know that it works, it's probably more important as practically as part of a stay well plan, because it's easy to do when you're well, much harder to do when you're depressed, more valuable to do when you're depressed. Green space, right? Being in nature really helps. And blue space, being next to water also helps. So being in nature really helps. And the last thing that you picked on is routine. People with bipolar disorder do really well with routine, and they do really badly with chaotic schedules, particularly in terms of sleep, but with all things. So these are really important parts of of a stay well plan. You mentioned earlier, staying away from cigarettes and alcohol, no matter how tempting they might be, is generally sensible as well. And we increasingly understand that eating a healthy diet might be useful. The best evidence at this stage is for a Mediterranean type diet. There's several clinical trials showing that a Mediterranean type diet is useful, all in unipolar depression, none in bipolar depression, but that's coming. And there's a lot of interest in the ketogenic diet. Huge enthusiasm and interest in the ketogenic diet. At this stage, we have preliminary evidence. We don't have large, well-conducted, well-randomized, well-controlled trials. They're not here yet. Interestingly, there was a study published fairly recently comparing keto and Mediterranean, and Mediterranean seemed to look a little bit better. The good thing about Mediterranean is whole countries eat it. It's easy. The keto diet is a tricky diet to stick to because it's very restrictive. So adherence to keto is tricky. But we need data from good quality trials. So diet and lifestyle, exercise, smoking cessation, social rhythms, sleep hygiene, all of those are really important part. And as you say, the social element is critical.
Yeah, no, I think I always say this is like 6 feet of health, which is like hydration, nutrition, sleep, light, social, and sports. And whenever you can improve one of them, it usually improves the other and
Correct.
improve your whole life.
That's really an interesting thing, that the good stuff tends to go together and the bad stuff tends to go together. So if you're living on takeaway pizzas, lying on your couch with the lights in dim lights, watching TV, not seeing friends, smoking, all those bad things tend to go together and all the good stuff tends to go together. And so the one gives you a vicious cycle of a spiral into ill health. And the other one is a virtuous cycle of a slow but steady climb into health.
Yeah, and maybe I can share a story because
Please do, Clement.
so when I had my first depression, I was 19 years old. And I was at the point in my life where I really felt overwhelmed. Just went to another city. I didn't have any friend. Like, had to meet new friend, and I got bullied at school a little bit. And so I stay at home, more and more isolating. So eating worse. Then I started smoking weed and watching a lot of shows instead of going to class. And and it really got worse and worse. And I believe then I did kind of everything that depression would happen. And at the time, I didn't know I was bipolar, but I'm sharing that because it can go really quick, which is really tough. And what I've learned over the year is, for me, the most important is to really act quickly, to ask for help. It's probably the main thing. To really, hey, I didn't do good job today. I'm not happy about myself, and to try to do it as fast as possible, so you don't let this cycle start, because it could be quite quick. So yeah, and also like treatment, and there's one thing that I'm always surprised is, why are we? Because a lot of patient like me, where we kind of have this kind of doubt into medicine and medical and research. And it's a bit, it's what I see, at least in community. So why do you think we can do to change that? Because at the end of the day, research is going to help us a lot, but what do you think we can do?
Well, I think it's hard to separate this out from wider societal trends. So there are very strong winds blowing in many countries of anti-authority, anti-elitism, distrust. And one of the things that social media has done is it's fueled a plethora of ill-informed conspiracy theories, alternative health views, and a place where everyone is an expert, but when all experts get equal airtime, and often the more controversial and the more radical and the more outrageous, the more ears you're going to get. So we live in a very tricky space, and mental health is not immune. And because mental health is a difficult space, it's complicated. There's no easy answers, even though we've given a couple of answers. They're not simple. They're not true for everybody all the time. So there's skepticism, and there are a lot of very confident voices espousing all kinds of other ways of managing things and other views and beliefs, and they're very confident, and they're very attractive. And so it's very hard for people to listen to this cacophony of voices on the internet to say, actually, this one is a charlatan and this one is a real expert. because they all sing a song, and very hard for an untrained ear to know what's a charlatan, what's just an uninformed opinion, and what's genuine expertise. Um, it's a very tricky thing. So there's a huge amount of misinformation. And there's the old cliche that untruths tend to spread faster and more robustly than truths, because untruths tend to be dramatic and simple, and truths tend to be complex and contextual. So the untruths tend to have a much easier path. So we live in a very tricky world, and mental health is not immune to this. We're very much in the forefront of a world shaped by social media and by the internet in ways that aren't always helpful.
One thing that I feel you should know, at least for Bipolar, is like if someone telling you that it's gonna be easy, it's usually a really bad sign. Like it's tough to be bipolar. It's like you struggle. It takes months or even years to get stable, and it's hard work every day, and you need to do a lot of different things. If someone, whatever it tells you, is telling you, oh, it's going to be easy, just do that, you're going to be fine. Yeah, usually a bad sign.
Although, again, there's a lot of heterogeneity in the disease. And, we've all seen people, at least I've seen plenty of people who do all the right things, get evidence-based therapy, and they struggle. And they don't respond the way that they're supposed to. And I've seen people who you give them your first line medicine and bingo, they're back to normal, and they don't see problems again. And I've seen plenty of those in my life, people who respond brilliantly to lithium or lamotrigine or whatever you give them, and they live a normal life afterwards. I have lots of people who have that experience, but there's a huge spectrum in between. The biggest challenge, as you kind of mentioned, is you first have to own the problem. You first have to recognize, A, I have a problem. B, I have some understanding of what it is, because otherwise you're going to be seeking help in all the wrong places. And then you've got to seek help. And help is not always easy, even in well-resourced countries with good healthcare systems. Mental health care is probably tougher to find than most other forms of healthcare. You'll have, if you have most major health problems, heart disease or cancer, you'll get into a healthcare system with much less difficulty than will be the case if you have a mental health problem. It's much harder to get care. So there are many barriers, and that's part of the research is more poorly resourced. So there's much less effort into finding new treatments. And in many countries, it's hard to get equitable care for people with mental health problems than compared to comparable physical health problems.
Yeah, it's like, because we still have this moment of like having to tell everyone, yeah, we are sick. So it's and it's a chemical problem, and it's why I really believe into research, because more and more we have like, could be way in the gene, and maybe you can tell us a bit more about that, because I'm seeing more and more like research showing that they found that bipolar could be on the gene or are on gene. And I feel like for me at least, it's kind of a way to help people accept that it's real, and it's not like just we're inventing the thing. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about that, yeah.
Sure, absolutely. So there's no question that that genetics plays a risk, is a factor in risk for the disease. So the best evidence we've got, if you've got an identical twin and you have the disorder, your twin has probably got a 60% chance of having it. So that says two things. The first is genetics is important. It's a major contributor. It's probably the largest single contributor. But also, 40% of people who are genetically identical don't get the disease, which says that genetics might be important, but it's not enough. There's other stuff going on. We also know that people get the disorder without a family history. So there can be nothing in your family and people can get sick. Uh, and there's a lot of work that's gone into looking at what genes are involved. The initial hope is that, we'll find one or two genes that explain the disorder. And that's been dashed. So, and this is true for every psychiatric disorder, from schizophrenia and autism and all of them. There's no genes of big effect. So there's no gene that explains more than 1% of the variance of the disorder. So there are lots of genes, dozens, hundreds, all of which have a tiny effect. Some of them tend to hang together in certain pathways. So some of the genes, they're clusters of genes that all talk to certain pathways in the brain. One of them is inflammation. The other one is mitochondria and energy generation. So a lot of genes involved that seem to center on energy generation and mitochondria. Then there's genes that are related to structural elements, like there's little cytoskeleton proteins that code for structural elements. They seem to be involved. And there's lots of other random genes doing weird things. But it's interesting that many of the drugs that we've got seem to have effects on these. We know lithium, for example, has effects on mitochondria, has effects on inflammation, has effect on many neurotransmitters. So it's unlikely that there's going to be a single molecule that governs it all. It's probably going to be a network of multiple interacting neural pathways, molecular pathways that are working together to cause this. And at the risk level, it's going to be a multitude of environmental factors that add to the genetic risk. So if you've got genetic risk, but you smoke a huge amount of marijuana, well, you're much more likely to become unwell. If you don't, your risks would be reduced. If you're living a healthy lifestyle and you're eating healthy food and you're exercising, you have lots of strong social network, your risk will be attenuated. If you've been the victim of major stress or trauma, your risk will go up. So it's not a single thing. It's an interaction of multiple lifestyle, environmental, genetic, social, trauma factors that together combine.
Yeah, and it's like that's the toughest, I think, for bipolar is like right now we still have a lot to learn, and it's like we are not seen as a normal sickness in a way for most people.
Yeah.
We're still this like, hey, yeah, but we don't really know. and it's why we need research, because we need to become something people are aware, where it wouldn't even cross someone's mind that it wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Or it would be like most people, at least that I know, wouldn't think about going through cancer without having like medical help.
Mm.
So we need to become that, and it's why we need research, and it's why we need like to help what Michael is working on, which is, I know it's a bit scary because it's like getting out of your comfort zone and being like, okay, I need to get out of my place, or I'm feeling depressed, but I don't want to. I feel better at home, but I think one of the good thing also is like getting out of your place to go somewhere to actually talk to people. It will also help you out. And I know, I know it's tough because at some point I couldn't get out of my place. And so I've been there, but if you can, and maybe sometimes what helped me in the past is to do things for other people
Mm.
and not only yourself. Think about the people you will help by doing this. It's like sometimes helped me in the past.
That is such an important point. People get much more by giving than by taking. In the mental health space, the best evidence probably comes from Alcoholics Anonymous. So AA is an incredibly useful resource for people who have alcohol problems. But there's two steps in AA. The first step is, I have a problem, I'm going to join the group. And then you get help from other people in the group, including the facilitators of the group. The second stage is you become a facilitator. And in terms of their own mental health and their own coping with alcohol, many people find that the transition to a facilitator brings them much more benefits in terms of their own ability to deal with their own difficulties. So you actually, the giver receives more than the receiver. It's counterintuitive, but it's absolutely true. The other point that you touched on, Clement, which I think is not well understood, but I believe it's absolutely true, that stigma is almost always founded in ignorance. Disorders that are not understood and for which there are no treatments are stigmatized. The best example is leprosy. Leprosy was this crippling, ugly disease that affected people, and people were shunned because they were contaminated, they were seen as being other. And once we understood it's a bacterial infection and you could get rid of it with an antibiotic, the stigma's disappeared. It's just another skin infection. It's no different to any other skin infection. You can just take an antibiotic, it's gone. It's not a stigmatized disorder anymore because we have treatment. Stigma is confined to things that we don't understand and we can't fix. Once we understand it and we can fix it, stigma goes away. And so the path to destigmatizing mental health, I've always believed, is through identification of treatments and understanding what the disorder is. Because those two tend to go together. You can't fix something you can't understand. But once you fix it, you understand it, and then stigma goes away like fog on a summer's day.
If you had a magic wand, Michael, what would you change in mental health? You kind of explained it, but it's kind of the running
So
question.
What would I change
If you
in what?
had the in mental health as a whole, if you had a magic wand?
Yeah, I think that the magic wand, I would wave it at understanding the causes of these illness and developing better treatments. And that's really what we've devoted our lives to doing, is trying to understand what causes these illness and how can we develop more effective treatments. If we can develop effective treatments, we can help people. And that's really what I think we are all fighting to do. And if I had a magic wand, that's what I would wave it over.
And I think it's important to know that you can be part of this journey. And yeah, it's like we can all do our little part. And what's a Michael, and I feel it a lot, like helping other people probably helped me a lot more. So like you have this trial, you have other trial, but just do it for others if it's not only for yourself, I would say.
Yeah.
And because at the end of the day, like we all need the purpose. And when we are in depression, we kind of lose purpose. So having this purpose can help you also a lot.
Couldn't say it better myself.
Thanks a lot for your time, Michael.
Thank you, Clement. Thank you.